When Gabby Giffords was shot and seriously wounded in Tucson 6 years ago, 6 other people killed by a gunman, a mentally ill gunman at that, it was a tragic day. But what was equally tragic was the way that some liberal commentators on that very day began blaming Sarah Palin. Why? Because Sarah Palin's political committee had put out a map with crosshairs marking 20 targeted Democratic districts, including Giffords. There's no picture of Giffords. There's no evidence that the gunman had ever seen this political map, but this was an effort to tie the former Alaska governor to the shooting. I wrote a piece that very day saying this was outrageous, and I was right. And so imagine my shock when 6 years later, after here in Alexandria, Virginia, another gunman opened fire on a baseball diamond where a bunch of Republicans were having a practice and nearly killed the House Republican whip, Steve Scalise, and wounded 4 others as well. That very night, the New York Times posted an editorial starting out with the Scalise shooting and then reverting back to 2011 and blaming Sarah Palin again for the Gabby Giffords shooting, say that she had been inciting the violence that took place that day. For one thing, it was completely and utterly tone deaf on a day when the country was still in shock, when Steve Scalise was still in the emergency room in critical condition. I just could not get my mind around it. And it was factually inaccurate, as the Times had to acknowledge in a correction the next day. The Times said it was sorry on Twitter, but it never apologized to Sarah Palin. Well, now 2 weeks later, she has filed a lawsuit. And I think that Palin has every right to be outraged by this editorial and every right to file a suit, but she's not very likely to win this suit. So first of all, to deal with just the politics of it and the journalism of it, I still fail to understand why this mean-spirited editorial, why even bring that up when the country was still reeling from the shooting at the baseball diamond? Why bring up Sarah Palin? It was obviously an attempt to shift the media focus from left-wing rhetoric because, from left-wing rhetoric because there was a lot of talk about the gunman in Virginia having been somebody who hated Trump, hated Republicans, and going to right-wing rhetoric, thereby here's Sarah Palin, she was somehow responsible for the Gabby Giffords shooting. Well, Sarah Palin, in filing suit, I think has called attention to just a reprehensible act of journalism. And I don't use that word lightly. I mean, I give the media wide berth. It's an editorial page, it's opinion, but it was just ugly and uncalled for, and just a sort of an affront to human decency in my view. But here's why she's not likely to win, because Sarah Palin, former governor, former vice presidential nominee, is very much a public figure. And when you're a public figure, the Supreme Court, under a 1964 decision, has set a very high bar for what you have to do to prevail in a libel suit. And you have to prove one of 2 things, either actual malice or reckless disregard for the truth, that you published something that you knew or should have known was false. Well, this editorial was false. The Times was forced to correct that. There was no evidence of incitement or even a link between Sarah Palin and this crazy gunman in Arizona. But by publishing the correction, probably mitigated to some degree any charge of actual malice toward Sarah Palin. In the end, I think there's a reason that most public figures, somebody, a global celebrity like Sarah Palin, either don't sue or doesn't successfully sue news organizations because of that very high legal bar in the United States. But in the end, I think that she has cast a spotlight on what the New York Times did, and maybe this lawsuit could have been averted if the Times had apologized to her right away and directly and in a full-throated manner, as well as all the other media mistakes lately, including the CNN retraction of that story about Russia and Anthony Scaramucci, which did include an apology. And you'll notice that Anthony Scaramucci is not suing, although he told me that that story was a lie. So, there's a knee-jerk reaction, I think, that if somebody is wronged by a piece of journalism, they obviously have the right to sue, but they could prevail and win some damages to their reputation. But when you are a public figure, it is very, very difficult to do that under the Supreme Court's own ruling. Until that standard changes, I'm not sure that Sarah Palin is going to ultimately prevail here, but she has certainly shown that she is not going to just sit by and passively take what she described as a sickening attack by the New York Times. And I think a lot of people, whether they're Sarah Palin fans or not, whether they're Republicans or not, on this particular instance and this particular editorial, are sympathetic to her.